So we came out of World War II with a debt that was about 127% of GDP, the highest it had been in a long, long time. And the top tax rate was 91%. And Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican governor, paid off a lot of that by borrowing even more money and engaging in massive infrastructure spending. The Eisenhower Interstate Highway System, building brand new schools, building hospitals, or helping communities build hospitals. There were two of them in Lansing where I was living, St. Lawrence and Ingham Medical, they built during that era. And that so built the economy with that top tax rate that we got our debt back down, we got our economy back. Joe Biden is proposing to do essentially the same thing under the the American Rescue Plan. Now, families making less than $75,000 a year this year will probably owe nothing in federal income taxes. And Biden wants to raise taxes on people making more than $400,000, and he wants to revisit Republican President Dwight Eisenhower's plan to rebuild America. There are some voices who are saying, no, wait a minute, you can't do that. Dan Mitchell, Dr. Dan Mitchell is on the line with us, the co-founder of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, and the Center freedomandprosperity.org is the website. Daniel J. Mitchell is his Twitter handle, as well as CFANDP. Dan, welcome back. It's been a long time since we've talked. So what's your objection to what Joe Biden is doing?
My objection is I don't think the federal government should, I think it's too big already, and I don't want it to get even bigger. And we already had a $2 trillion supposed COVID relief package, not a lot to do with COVID, actually. Now he has a $2 trillion so-called infrastructure plan, although only $115 billion is for roads and bridges. And then he also has this additional $2 trillion plan for even more social spending, and all that's being accompanied by a lot of higher taxes. And the bottom line is I just don't think making our economy more like Greece or Italy is going to be a good recipe.
Or Denmark or Canada. Right now, our federal government is about 17, 18% of GDP. And if you take out all of the privatization that is happening in the federal government, you know, a little more than a third of our total federal budget is privatized, and if you include, you know, acquisitions, it's more than 2/3. More than half of our intelligence budget has been privatized. If you take all that out, our federal government, the actual federal government part of our federal government, is about 10% of GDP. In Canada, I believe it's 37%. I'm running from memory off numbers that are probably a couple years old. I think most of your European countries, you'll find the government spending because they're providing healthcare system. They're providing healthcare to everybody and free college to everybody, is typically around 35 to 40% of GDP. I don't understand why you're saying that a federal government that's 20% of GDP, more or less, is a bad thing when all these other countries have a better quality of life, more, a more predictable retirement for older people. Younger people can go to college without ending up in debt. We had 600,000 bankruptcies last year for medical debt. It's going to be far worse when we finally see the stats because of the COVID. And the total number of medical bankruptcies in Canada, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and Greece combined was out for 30 seconds. So you probably missed the end of my rant, and I missed part of what you said. So go for it again.
Okay, well, I think I heard what you said, and I simply responded by noting that according to the OECD data, living standards in America are about 40% above European levels, and a person in the bottom quintile in the U.S. has a living standard roughly equal to a middle-class person in Europe. So there is a real consequence in terms of slower growth, lower wages, lower salaries to having a European-sized government, and I just don't think that Americans would want to pay that price.
Well, I lived in Europe for a year, and yeah, the standard of living is somewhat lower than it is here for the middle class. People are less likely to have more fancy furniture, or maybe they buy a car every third year or something like that, and homes are a little more modest, at least where I was living, out in rural Germany in Stuttgart. But everybody had health care. Everybody had free education. Nobody feared old age or retirement. I mean, it just seems to be that the terrors of living in America that are characterized, and made visible by things like this movie, Nomadland, are pretty much not the norm in countries that have bigger governments. You say America's government is too big. I'm fine with cutting parts of the defense budget, but I'm not hearing an argument that says that here's the perfect size of government. What is it? Can you identify any country in the world that has gutted all of their social safety net systems, that has done away with Medicare, that has done away with Social Security, that has done away with all these so-called big government programs that you're talking about, where life is actually good and people have a high standard of living? Denmark supposedly has the happiest people in the world.
Well, speaking of Denmark, did you know that until the 1930s, there was virtually no welfare state in Denmark or any country in the world? The Western world became rich in the 1800s and early 1900s when there was no welfare state, no income tax. Now, once they got rich enough, these countries made choices. We all made choices to varying degrees to adopt big government sectors. But that comes at a cost. Instead of growing 3% a year, maybe you're growing 2% a year. But over time, that adds up to a lot. And like I said, I don't think if the average American saw a German family or a French family living in a tiny flat with a refrigerator the size of something you have in a dorm in the United States, they would not want to trade places. And that's the trade-off that we have to be honest about. Do you want
because the food is fresh
economy?
And it's right down the street. I mean, it's.
Okay,
I think for anybody who's lived in Europe, Dan, I think they're rolling their eyes right now. I mean, I lived in Europe for a year, and I've probably spent another year of my life in at least a half a dozen European countries, and people, have you ever watched Michael Moore's movie Where to Invade Next, where he goes around Europe?
I have probably spent a year in Europe myself, extended speaking tours, visits, and stuff like that. And I know
life is not miserable there.
Far more expensive. Housing is low. I'm not saying it's miserable. I'm saying that they made a choice to have bigger welfare states and higher taxes. And by the way, their higher taxes are mostly on the middle class and low income people.
So you're saying
I just don't.
Right. You're saying America has. So you're saying America has more money, basically. Well, in 1800, the wealth of the top 400 Americans was 2% of America's wealth. And that's when Reaganism kicked in. By 2000, it was up to 10% of America's wealth. By 2015, it was up to 15% of America's wealth. And on May 1st, 2021, it hit 19% of all of America's wealth. The top 400 families. Oh, Dan, I'm sorry. I wasn't watching my clock. I would like you to have the last word. I don't know if you got a quick rebuttal for that. You got about 10 seconds.
I would simply say that I'd rather have the opportunity that our more free market-oriented system in America gives us.